Everyone, how you doing? Welcome back to our collaboration with myself, Hinny at Queer Hinny on YouTube, and Chris from Chris Astrology. And we are back with part two of the shadow side in astrology, little mini series that we are doing. And our previous one was on the seventh house, and we're doing the eighth house today. And if you're new, though, or if you're not following one of us already, go do that. First of all, go follow us on YouTube. My channel is Queer Hinny, and Chris, his channel is Chris Astrology. And yeah, I think that's all good. How are you doing today, Chris?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you as well. I'm happy on this Sunday fun day.
Yeah, it was a good weekend for me. So yeah.
Yeah, I know you're busy with your studies and everything, so I hope you're not working too hard.
Yeah, I'm trying to balance everything. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's morning there, right? How early is it?
It's 10 a.m.
Okay, thank you for for getting up in the morning. It's 6 p.m. here.
Yeah. If you don't know, I live in California and he
Mm.
lives in London, in England. I'm not sure which city do you live in.
Yeah, I live in London. That's right.
Okay.
I live in London. Yeah, I've been here for about 10 years now.
So you told me you have some questions for me. So let's start with the questions.
Yeah, I've got a lot of questions for you. So I think I'm going to be a bit of a host today. I'm really curious to see your take on the eighth house. And so, Chris, I guess especially for people who don't know so much about astrology, or maybe they do know a bit about astrology, but not the houses. Could you maybe first of all let everyone know kind of what we mean by the eighth house? Like, what are we even counting, first of all?
Okay, so there is
Mm.
12 zodiacs in astrology, and each person is some rising sign, it's based on the hour you were born, and then it goes 12 zodiacs from the sun with started with your rising. So usually for example, each sign is ruled by different zodiac signs. So eight houses ruled by Scorpio because Scorpio is the eight sign in the usual astrology people use. So yeah, and the eighth house is the house of sex, rebirth, everything that goes to marriage, mutual resources, occult. So I think astrology also falls in the eighth house most likely.
Mm.
Yeah.
That kind of leads on to my next question, actually. So what is the eighth house to you? Yeah. So I guess if there's a mainstream, I guess there's some mainstream topics, right, in the eighth house, maybe like sex. And what is it like to you? Like in your practice, what have you found that the eighth house is most truly to be about?
I think there's a lot of different
Mm.
things about eight house. One of them, I don't have any clients who have passed who had died, but I know where you can see the cause of death in the eighth house. I'm not sure,
Mm.
I don't have any experience to see how true is it, but Hannah elsewhere on her channel have mentioned by looking at eighth house you can see what will be the death of a person.
Wow.
Also,
Yeah.
I think eight house can be astrology, tarot, and old occult subjects. So I think that one of the things why I'm an astrologer because I have a North Node in the eighth house. In North
Mm.
Node, for people who don't know, it's the thing you should work on during this lifetime. So I think it's kind of my destiny that I need to work on occult subjects. And also of course as Kenny mentioned, I think it also shows sexuality, but more not casual sex fifth house, but more the approach to sexuality. It can show sexual
Mm.
trauma. It can show
Mm.
sometimes it can even show sexual identity or some more deep subjects about sexuality.
Mm. Yeah. So yeah, in my practice as well, especially I see in the eighth house, yeah, death, like all the kinds of death, all kinds of endings, and yeah, trauma, things like that. Yeah, absolutely, and yeah, okay, cool. Um, And so we did part one on the seventh house. And I hope people watching, if you haven't already, you should go and watch that first before you watch this one. But for those who haven't watched that or don't know anything about the seventh, is there any like special connection between the seventh and the eighth? Like especially in relation to the shadow side?
I think like I'm not even sure. Like I don't think I heard like anywhere like this in the like the books I read, but like it's my own perspective on it. Like the
Great.
seventh house is like the shadow we see in other people, and like eighth house is more like a dark side. For example, like I believe that like people who have a lot of planets like stellium in eighth house, they can be like witches or wizards because like they have like some magical powers because like it's very like intense eighth house. So they have like some dark side which is very prominent.
Ooh, okay. Witches and wizards. That's fascinating. I like that. Yeah, there is this connotation, I think, with the eighth house of being very like dark, mysterious, as you mentioned before, kind of occult. That is very interesting. Could you tell us a bit about your own eighth house, if you don't mind sharing? What's in your own eighth house?
My eighth house is a little bit interesting. Like I don't have any planets in it, but I have Lilith, which is also like a dark side and like a dark sexuality, like dark feminine side. And like I also have North Node. So like it's still like powerful, although I don't have any like personal planets there.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, and I like that you mentioned sort of the non-planets as well. I think there's still some significance, right? If we have a node or something else in a house. And so you talked about the North Node already kind of being about what we're becoming. What about Lilith? For those who don't know, what is Lilith, first of all, briefly, and what might it mean to have Lilith in the eighth house?
Like Lilith is she came like from biblical myths. Like she was first wife of Adam before he like married Eve. So like it shows like a dark feminine side because like Eve is like more feminine side, like Venus, and like Lilith is like dark Venus or some like in some subject. And it can show like people's sexuality, people dark side, like it's also taboo, like the same as eighth house. So I think we like very close to each other. So for example, like I more like reserved now, but like when I was teenager, I was very open about my sexuality and like I was like exploring my sexual side. So like I think it was kind of like my Lilith playing because like I liked like attention on myself. So like I think it's like the combination of like Lilith and eighth house, like being more open about your sexuality and like having like some sexual aura.
Okay, that's cool. Okay, yeah. Yeah, when I think of Lilith as well, I think of like the runaway archetype, the rebellious
I
sort
remember
of.
the series. I recommend people to watch from Sweden. I like
Oh, really?
it was
Well, thank you. Thank you. And thank you for sharing us a bit about your eighth house as well. And in my case, for example, my eighth house is quite small, just like my second house. And I don't have any planets, but I do have my North Node in the eighth house in Aquarius. And I guess, what could you tell us for those who don't have anything at all, those who just have a sign in the eighth house? What could you tell those people? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people like that watching, but still interested.
I feel like it still can show the sexuality and like kind of like a cold subject of this person. Like I don't think like we would be very much into a call themselves usually, but maybe they would be. But like I think like it can also like show, for example, like if you have Aquarius in your eighth house, you can be like Aquarius is like detached and like experimental. So you can be like experimental with your sexuality and like be like more like quirky in it. Or for example, Gemini, like a lot of clients I had with Gemini in eighth house, they were bisexual because like Gemini is like twins, so it's gonna be like more dual. So like I think like a lot of people with Gemini in eighth house can be at least have like some queer tendencies sometimes because like it's more double, like more experimental.
Oh, fascinating. And I think maybe in a future episode, we're going to revisit this topic, right? Of finding the gay in the chart. Perfect. Yeah. What about, so you're a Sagittarius rising, right? And I am a Cancer rising, so your sort of chart ruler is Jupiter and mine is the moon. What if someone has their chart ruler planet in the eighth house? Would you say that's like more significant for the person?
I think so because like
Mhm.
of course like my first house is like very dominant house. So
Mm,
if you have something from your first house in the eighth house, it's has like much more emphasis. So I think this
mm,
planet will become much more stronger because if
mm,
it's
mm,
like the chart ruler planet, it will show like a lot about your side, like about your sexuality in this case, like your called subject matter. So like I think it
mm.
will increase with topics in your life.
Okay, okay. So kind of like a highlight, further highlighting.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, okay. Interesting. And I don't know, maybe we don't have time to go through all the planets, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you see as good, quote unquote, good or easier planets in the eighth, and then maybe the bad, quote unquote, bad or less easy planets in the eighth. Do you have any opinions on that?
Yeah, I think it will be like pretty much it's like all other houses, like the best planets will be Venus
Mm,
and Jupiter because they're benefics. But like I also
mm.
think that like sometimes like Moon in eight house can be like more benefic, but there's like
Oh.
some controversiality about it because
Mhm.
people believe that like they can have like people with Moon in eight house, they can have like some trouble where feminine side, they can have some problems
Mm,
with mothers with just females around them.
mm,
So yeah, like for example, like for Malefics, like of course, like it will be Mars and Saturn, but like also maybe Pluto, but like I also think like Pluto can have some positive sides because
mm,
Pluto can make like a person more intense, so like they can be like much more into like taboo subjects, which can sometimes can make
mm.
yeah, like it can be a bad thing, but it can be a good thing as well because like they'll be much more intense and like much more interesting person.
I was just going to ask you actually, um, when you mentioned the malefics, so someone watching, they might have, for example, Mars or Saturn in the eighth house, and they might, when when they see this word malefic, they might think, "Oh no, is something wrong with me?" And what will you say to people who have like a malefic in the eighth house? Because the eighth house is already quite like usually quite serious topics, and when we put a malefic, quote unquote, bad planet in there, what does that mean? Are we doomed? Like, what can you say to that?
Of course not, because like my life have like good sides as well.
Yes, tell
Yeah,
us.
like of course, yeah.
Mm,
Like I just think like these people should work more on their eighth house. Like it can be like
mm,
something they like to need to learn. At least like for Saturn, like Saturn can be like a little bit like repressed, like a cold subject and repressed
mhm,
sexuality. So like for these people, you just need to work more on your eighth house. But like it doesn't mean
mm.
that like you're doomed. So like you just need to like pay more attention to the subject matter.
Okay, okay, yeah, good, good. I'm glad that we we let people know that you're not doomed if you have Saturn or Mars in in the eighth. And I guess even if we flip it, like let's say someone has a good planet in the eighth, is there anything they should still be aware of, even if it is a benefic?
Of course, yeah. For example,
Mhm.
like Jupiter, it's some like it makes like it has much more stronger. So sometimes like
Mm,
Jupiter can save like a person have like sexual trauma because like we need like to work it out to become like much more like fulfilling person through the eighth house, like for teacher.
mm.
Stuff like it
Oh,
can
I see.
for example, like it can show that like somebody had like a sexual trauma and then like they become like a feminist like supporter or like advocate or like maybe like sexual health teacher. So like
Mm.
from like this trauma they became much stronger and like they succeeded in their life because of this trauma.
Okay. Okay, that's good. That sounds good though, right? Like
Yeah.
a good use of the benefic planet. Okay, and so is it always like is it always I guess it's not always perfect, right? Then with the benefic, it's like the silver lining with Jupiter.
Yeah. Because like,
Mm,
of course like nobody wants to have a sexual trauma, but like if you
mm.
have it and like you benefit from it, like it have like both good and bad sides.
Yeah, yeah. And I like that example you gave of like a teacher, someone who teaches from their space of trauma, their experience of trauma. That's really beautiful. And I hope that people let us know in the comments if you want to share. Please let us know if you have any sort of stories that reflect your own 8th house placements. I'd love to know. So Chris, so we talked a bit about planets in the 8th. What about like signs? Is there anything you'd like to let us know about the different signs in the 8th house?
Like I think like if it just like show like the attitude to the cold, like the Scorpio house, like it was people would be like much more intense. While I think like I heard like the Taurus is like much more like grounded sign, so this people would be like more skeptical about like dark sides of the light.
Ooh, okay, okay, okay. That's interesting. And do you have a favorite sign in the 8th?
I like Leo because like I have Leo in the
Oh,
house. Like Leo like makes people like very like dramatic, like very open. So like I also have like Lilith, so it makes like me like open about it. And like but like also like I think like Leo, like I'm not sure if it's like a more like bad thing, but like sometimes like it says for like Lee in 8th house can have public deaths. So it's also like something interesting.
wow, public death. Wow.
And like
Okay, that's
yeah, and like Aquarius and 8th,
wow.
I also like it because like it's very experimental and like very fluid.
Yeah, yeah, Aquarius in the 8th house. Great. Public death, that sounds very heavy, right? What about in your practice, Chris? Is there anything you've noticed in terms of signs like that's of interest in the 8th house?
I think like I have like a little bit like an opposite example of it. Like I have a person who has like Virgo in 8th house. And
Oh,
so
wow.
they very like practical about like occult. Like they don't believe like in any like spiritual sides. Like they very like practical. But on the other hand,
Oh,
like they have a lot of planets in 8th house. So it shows that like they have like some like secret powers, but like they don't believe that they have secret powers themselves because like Virgo is like very critical of that.
oh, that's very interesting as well. I always find that interesting when we find these people with these charts or this kind of astrology who have maybe more skeptical placements or maybe a lot of earth or air in the chart, but they're still coming for a reading or they're still curious and asking questions, right? So there's always that little other side of the curiosity.
Friend also, so like probably that's why I ask for the reading. But like at least I ask for the reading, so
Yeah, absolutely. Just in my experience, I have some friends who don't want to talk about astrology at all. Then I have others who are really into it. Then I have others who are kind of like somewhere in the middle. They're kind of secretly curious.
like I didn't share it on my channel, but like I feel like it's also like interesting to say. But like I was very popular with like doing astrology like when I was in college. So like for like it's a lot of like when we were like hanging out with friends, like I was reading like I read almost like all my friends' charts because like they were like always like interested about it. Like it was like very like hot topic in my college. So like I read maybe like a lot of people like who were in my same college showed me like different charts of people there.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I think a lot of us do that. Like with tarot, astrology, it's like, especially if it's free, right? You offer free readings. Everyone wants one. Yeah, that's really fun. And I guess it's hard as well to talk about people's 8th house in that kind of fun, free sort of space, right? And I guess, are there any other like topics that you know of that are not so like heavy or dark when it comes to the 8th house? Is there anything like,
Maybe mutual resources.
yeah. Okay, okay. Can you tell us a bit more about that, mutual resources?
Like I feel like 8th house also like shows like what comes after marriage. Like usually like I feel like in more old style, more, like old times sexuality came after marriage. So that's why it's in 8th house. But like also like mutual resources is also in the 8th house. Is like when a couple gets married and they have like now all everything which is mutual. So some planets can show you what like you can benefit from like getting married like into the money, for example. Like Jupiter can show like somebody who can benefit from the money. For example, like I had a client who had a Jupiter in 8th house, and I wouldn't say that like they married rich, but like they have like the same business with their partner. So like we
Oh.
were like benefiting, but not because we married rich, but like because like we were like kind of like collaborating in their married life.
Oh, that is really cool. I like that a lot. That's really cool. And I know also that the eighth house is associated with inheritance as well. Like, have you seen that in any of your studies? Like people getting stuff suddenly from
Yeah,
like a
you're
yeah,
eighth house, of course. Yeah.
yeah.
Like I
I've
didn't
got
talk about Neptune and Uranus, but like yeah, like I think like Uranus like shows you can have like inheritance like suddenly, and Neptune can like be suddenly as well, but like in Neptune you sometimes can lose it because like Neptune's like
mm,
illusion.
yeah. I hear that a lot. Neptune's about illusion, confusion, and also like dissolving of boundaries, that kind of thing. Um, I also I wanted to say also I have Aquarius in the eighth house, and it's really weird. Like I had an experience in my life quite a few years ago where a relative who I didn't even know about passed away. But because that relative passed away, it caused an aunt of mine who I also didn't know about to come into my life and give me basically what my grandmother had given all of her grandchildren in her will. Basically, I met this brand new aunt because of that death, and I got some money as well, even though I didn't know about these people at all until the death. So the eighth house has this little weird. It depends on the sign as well, like what the flavor is going to be, but it does have this theme of sudden gain, right, of things. And it's kind of weird though because it's sad as well. Someone dies or someone loses a job, but there's a gain or responsibility as well. So that kind of thing, maybe people can relate to that. Let us know in the comments if you're going through your eighth house transit as well right now, if there's any planets going through that. Yeah.
I know like it's kind of like you asking me questions, but like I like came up with a question like myself for you.
Yeah.
Like I was always like interested in it, and like I didn't like see any like good like advices about it. So what would you say to a person who have a Saturn return in eighth house? Like I had a client like this, and like I wasn't sure like how to describe it.
Saturn return in the eighth house. Yeah, I mean, it can go in many, many different ways. I would look to the sign, absolutely. I would look also to what house your Saturn is ruling, or what houses. Even for example, in my chart, Saturn rules like 3 or 4 of my houses, so it's quite busy. Saturn, very strong. Maybe your Saturn is more afflicted or more in dignity as well in your chart. So check first of all, I guess, the status of your Saturn. But the general, very, very general in isolation themes, I think of a Saturn return in the eighth house is going to be something to do with a recalibration of serious things that are eighth house. So this can be debt, this can be death, this can be loss, this can be contracts, but it's Saturn return, and we maybe our viewers who don't know the Saturn return, just very briefly, is about when Saturn reaches the point it was at when you were born. And Saturn's quite slow, so that usually doesn't happen until you're about 27 years old, maybe 28, somewhere in that region, and it lasts about 3 years ish, the whole Saturn return event, because Saturn doesn't just go through the house, it kind of tends to dip back through retrograde about 2 more times. But the first hit, and even the build up to that hit, is when you start to feel the themes of where you have Saturn natally being activated. And yes, I would say something to do with losses or inheritances, and it all has to do with how you have been working with your Saturnian stuff until you're 27. So what kind of not good things did you give out into the universe? What kind of good things did you give out to the universe? How responsible and serious have you been about things in your life? How much time did you take? Because Saturn is also about meditation and isolation of the self. So how much time did you take to really look at yourself and take yourself seriously? Not in a high and mighty way, I mean to look at your shadow, right, as well as your achievements, right? That's really important to do before your Saturn return. And I think it's always a blessing when people get into astrology before their Saturn return, because now you have the blessing, the chance to study what your 8th house Saturn means. And then you can kind of even predict. You can never predict exactly how, but you can predict the signatures or the flavors. It's like the weather, right?
I think it's also important to save, like you also have like 2 hours Saturn return in like more later life, like in your
Yes.
50s and 90s. For example, like my father right now is going for the second Saturn return, so it can happen.
Exactly. It can happen later, and I guess that's a good thing. Hopefully, people kind of have that moment, that recalibration moment in their late 20s to 30s. But yes, in their 50s, you're visited again, kind of with a second reminder. And yeah, nowadays most people may well have a third. Yeah. Yeah. So that's interesting. And I think the first one though is the most important, because that's when we're most hit with adult Saturnian themes.
Okay, so let's go back to the 8th house.
Yes, back to the 8th house. I wanted to ask you, Chris, sort of for those people who want to work with their 8th house. So, I think it's good when we learn what the 8th house means, and we learn what the planets in the 8th house mean, and we learn about the Saturn return even. What would your advice be to people who want to actually work on their 8th house?
Like I would say, like probably go to the therapy, because like it's kind of like you work on your dark side. So like I would recommend like to go to the therapy, or like if you don't like want to go to the therapy, like I would recommend you to do some therapy for yourself, like do some journaling, maybe like do some meditation apps. So like kind of like be honest with yourself about your dark side, and like probably like work on it.
Okay. Thank you. And what about like having Gemini in the 8th house like yourself? Have you got any special tricks or tips for this placement?
But yeah, like if we talk about Gemini, I would probably say writing, because like yeah, like Gemini is like works with like literature talents. So probably like maybe like writing like some horror stories, or like maybe like yeah, like something like taboo. Like for example, like I am writing like sometimes like especially like as a teen, I was writing like some dark stories, because like I had like some like dark thoughts, or like I didn't want like of course like express them in real life. So like I was just like writing them down like from like different characters' views. So like maybe like I read like some horror stories. So like something like this would be helpful like for Gemini in the 8th house.
Oh yeah, that's really cool. Because yeah, when I think of Gemini energy, a lot of the time I think of things like anime, um, yeah, illustrations, cartoon characters, and it's really interesting, I guess, when it's in the 8th house.
Yeah, but like
Yeah.
it's also a writer, because like third house is like the house of like it shows like the hands, and like so like it's also like all like arts and crafts. It's like all like writing. So yeah.
Yeah. I definitely agree that Gemini is about, at least about, relating to the other through youthful ways, kind of like with cartoons or anime or writing, wit, humor, that kind of thing. That's
Yeah,
cool.
like it's gonna be like a horror stories for teenagers, for example.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, like Goosebumps. That
Like
reminds us of Goosebumps.
right now, like it's also like a little bit like more mature, but like he writes like about like teenagers, like in his books. Thinking about
Yeah,
like
that's really interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. And what about if someone's 8th house ruler is in like not in the 8th house, if it's somewhere else? Could you talk a little bit about that? And what is the ruler of the 8th house?
To be honest, like I don't know much about it, but like I'll try to answer my best. Like
Yeah, sure.
like the ruler of the 8th house, like every house have like a sign it rules it. So like for example, like if your 8th house is in Leo, like mine, so like this planet which is ruled by Leo is Sun. So like for example, like in my chart, Sun is located like in 7th house. Like how I would assume maybe it stays with like my like relationship would be more intense, because like seventh house is the house of relationship, and like so like the relationship now have like a little bit like more eighth house like scorpionic energy, so maybe it has like more intensity.
Okay, yeah, that's cool. Yeah, and sorry, I forgot that you have Leo there and not Gemini. Okay, that's my mistake. Okay. I guess I'm curious also for people who are watching who have, like we talked about earlier, an empty eighth house, because if we want more information on the eighth house and it's empty, it's really good to look at the ruler of that house. And I think that's really cool for those just getting into their charts. Like you can, even an empty house has so much meaning. Look to the planet ruler, right? Or the house ruler.
Yeah, like, and like probably like also like there's like the planet which is the sand ruler is like hated.
Yeah.
So it's also like in my case, sun. Like if I had like an empty eight house, like I would look like at the sun. So like it's like I told you, like my I have stellium in seventh house, so like maybe it's like make my seventh house like stronger.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, I agree. And yeah, if you have the eighth house ruler, yeah, as part of a stellium, that's suddenly making your eighth house quite important.
Yeah, like I have like
Cool.
a combination of 7 and 8, kind of like.
I like that. I like that. Okay, that's kind of all the questions I sort of had for you, Chris. Is there anything else that you'd like us to talk about on this topic of the shadow side and the eighth house? Anything that you think our viewers might like to know?
Like I was like interested like your opinion about the sun in eighth house, because like also like there's like the sun is like very important planet, because like it's like a lot of people when they think about astrology think about the sun, but like I wasn't sure like is it a good like is it like malefic or benefic in the eighth house, because like I know it like kind of shows what like you have like kind of like intense relationship with male figures and like your father, but like I'm not sure like what would you say about people in with sun in eighth house.
This is really interesting. And I think, again, we're just talking in a very isolated sense. So I would tell people to look at what houses your sun rules in the chart first, because you have the sun in the eighth, but maybe you don't have this, maybe you don't have Leo in the eighth house, and therefore your sun is ruling some other houses in your chart. So check that out first, and also look to the sign and that it's in, and look to the condition of the sun. Are there any other planets there? Because to me, the sun is considered a benefic, wherever it may be. It's most happy in the ninth house. It's very interesting, though, because it's like it's as in the ninth house. It's as though the sun is like trying to get to the or it's sort of like, how do I want to describe this? It is trying to get to where the sun is at its highest, the 10th house, but it's going back down to the ninth. And so there's a sense even that it's been part of the eighth already. So I think the sun is actually, what I want to say in short, is that it's very comfortable actually with eighth house topics. You might even want to say it's very confident with eighth house topics somehow. And I like to think of the sun as the radiator, the illuminator, in that you can put that light, that confidence, that pride even onto these heavier topics. You could be someone who is also, even in a more mundane sense, you could be someone who is illuminating sort of shared resource themes for other people in your life somehow. So maybe you're working with accounts, or working with wills, or working with something like that. So it's like you're within the eighth house topics, but your role is more like to illuminate, or even to provide happiness and joy. So you could work in some sort of death industry, or some sort of debt field as well. That's something. But I think also, I think people who can illuminate secrets, other people's secrets, they're very good at illuminating other people's business. And that can go many different ways. It can go very well, can go very bad, it can be a mix. It really depends on the individual who has this placement. But yeah,
I feel
the
like
father. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
it also like reminded me, like if you have like a house like in somebody else eighth house, like in synastry, like you know, like when two charts overlay, like it also like
Yeah.
shows like you can like see the dark side. Like for example, myself, like I very enjoy dating people who have like how like it's their sun in my eighth house, like or like my sun in their eighth house, because like it's maybe because like I have like sun in seventh house, like in Leo, burning my eighth house, but like I think it's like it's very like intense relationships and very interesting relationship, and like there's like synastry in eighth house.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that is such an interesting topic that I'm really into. Other people's suns in your chart. That is so fascinating.
About it right now, yeah.
Yeah, this is the individual. If you know someone else's sun, like the degree and the sign, you can immediately find out what themes in your life they are illuminating, in some sense. That's very fascinating. And yeah, I guess if it's in the eighth house, someone's sun's in your eighth house, yeah, you get this illumination, or they illuminate. Yeah, they could even make you happy, or more joyful, give you, it's also the kind of giving vitality.
Yeah, like it's like
Something.
relationships to some point.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so they want to end it now. Like I feel like we talked about it.
Yeah, I think we talked a lot about the eighth house.
Yeah, starting to go like about our topics right now. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy. I think we did a good job of just kind of going over the main things that I think people will be interested in, and I hope that people took something from this, and that you let us know in the comments sort of your own eighth house chemistry.
What plans you have, what signs you have, yeah.
Yeah, and if you have follow-up questions for us, go ahead and ask. We'll be happy to answer for you.
Oh. Have a nice day, everyone.
Have a nice day, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.